So there is no Desi without DEI. Growing up across 10 different states, she found consistency in volunteerism, such as food drives, shelters, teaching sports skills to children with disabilities, anonymous suicide hotlines, and more. As a queer woman of color, she repurposes her vastly diverse life expertise by specializing in intersectional advocacy. After graduating from the University of Virginia in 2014, she spent her main career running inclusive recreational programs at several colleges and universities. At each institution, she introduced adaptive sports and creative grassroots DEI initiatives, leading to long-standing internal changes. She has been featured in publications concerning national sales strategy, LGBTQIA plus representation within sports, hair discrimination, aesthetic trauma, and mental health advocacy in the workplace, while challenging all other isms. She has also volunteered for the past 5 years as a venue director for Special Olympics of Georgia. In 2019, she became a research assistant for the head of psychology at the University of DC, Dr. Afia Mbilishaka, After conducting extensive research and producing several manuscripts, she shifted her role to become the business development manager for psychotherapy. Psychotherapy utilizes hair care as an entry point for self-care and equitable mental health access for people of color. And finally, Desi is the Ideas Development Partner for Inclusion Network, or INW, and is responsible for the facilitation, content creation, research implementation, and social engagement. Desi is a connector, creating bridges between not only psychotherapy and inclusion network, but the world. When she's not working, you will find her either traveling with her partner or playing with her adorable pets. So if everyone in the community can help me in welcoming Desi to our conversation today. And as we stop sharing the screen, I would love to invite Desi for you to introduce yourself to our audience, to our community in your own way, in a way that maybe doesn't capture everything that was mentioned in what I just read.
I mean, you captured a lot. That was a lot. So thank you, Christina.
You've done a lot.
And thank you all for being here. I love seeing that folks are from totally different places in the country. And like they mentioned, my name is Desi. I use she, her pronouns. As a visual description, I am a light-skinned woman with locks, wearing black glasses and a white sweater against a beige background. And I'm also sitting on Kumeyaay territory in San Diego, California. So if you need some sunshine, come out here. And again, just so excited to be on this conversation, talk about all the things I'm passionate about with y'all, because we're all of the same mind. And that's really the whole point of me being here. So thank you, Christina. Thank you, Dr. White. Thank you, Mark. Thank everyone.
No, thank you. And we deeply appreciate the way that you introduced yourself. These are practices that we've been imploring and utilizing within NWC, giving homage to all the intersectional areas that we give reference to and give honor to. And excited to jump into the content of today's conversation. So one of the things that we, have engaged in sharing out is that we're going to be talking about in this conversation, redefining professionalism. And in that redefinition, I would love to know what your definition for professionalism is and why it's more important for organizations to have discussions about professionalism and how we frame it within the workplace.
Awesome. I'm really glad that we started off with this question, because the whole point of what is professionalism is that it doesn't matter, does it? I feel like what I thought was my definition of professionalism, I realized that I needed to break my relationship with that, and I needed to challenge my reality when it came to that, because all I had been experiencing was disappointment that I wasn't living up to these professional standards, and then feeling like I was never good enough, feeling that fed into my imposter syndrome, feeling like I wasn't at the level of my more traditional professional colleagues, when in reality, when I started to think about what is professionalism supposed to look and do and serve a purpose for, and it's being a professional. It's doing your job, being really good at your job. Does any way about how I look affect that? No. Does any way about how my hair is styled affect that? No, not at all. And it definitely pushed me into this research on professionalism urgency, the concept of time being based in white supremacy and based in capitalistic beliefs that I don't want to sign into, because it's just hurt for a very long time to try to hold all of those up while holding multiple intersectional identities that do not line up necessarily with the wealthy white male supremacy that a lot of isms have been based in.
Right. Absolutely. And so as a follow-up to that, so you mentioned you had to kind of redefine it for yourself, and you realized that a lot of the ways in which you felt and really executed your professionalism were steeped in these tenets of white supremacy or whiteness. And I think that a lot of times when we have conversations about professionalism, we also are talking about respectability, or what some people may refer to as respectability politics, or the idea that folks that are of groups that have historically been marginalized need to adapt customs or practices or ways of presenting themselves that are in line with the actions of the majority group. And a lot of times that's been steeped in to survival, for, the need to survival, the need to adapt, or in some cases assimilate for the sake of safety, or financial stability, what have you. But what place do you think respectability and maybe moving away from it has, as we're trying to redefine or maybe eliminate the definition of what we've historically known as professionalism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're alluding to here is that in order to see the change that we want people to see us differently. We want to be seen as more of our whole and less around these standards that we're not necessarily made for everyone or most people. It's also navigating our own lens and then using that change lens and putting it into infrastructure of different systems in order to help create this domino effect of changing what we decide is respectable, what we decide is worth, like putting someone on a competency pedestal. And those are all implicit biases. I mean, we do a training on warmth and competency where we take a bunch of pictures of folks that, of course, you're going to think a certain way about, and then reveal that they're a completely different person than from what you thought. And can you imagine if we did something like that frequently, if we constantly checked our own biases all the time? And when it comes to professionalism, am I going into a professional situation, a meeting, and I catch myself having maybe a first thought on, ooh, that doesn't look too great, or they don't look too great, or they're not coming across quite professional. And then my second thought being, wait, no. What is that based in? Because I wouldn't want someone to think of me like that. So I'm not going to bring that into this space. And maybe I verbalize that, maybe I challenge my peers to do that. And that's how we create ripple effects that can have a massive change on what's defined as professionalism, because it's usually defined by those who are expecting us to like be and act in a certain way relative to our jobs or the standards that they've been held to in general. So if your manager is trying to hire someone, they're going to think about what standards they're held to regarding professionalism as well, and look for that in you, because they don't want to be made to look bad. They want to make sure that you're a good culture fit. They want to, all of these things. It's all very tied together. And giving permission to let off of the reins a little bit, I think we can really see some amazing, beautiful, more personalities, more visualizations of what professionalism can look like in so many different spectrums.
Yeah. So keeping with that same concept of consistently checking those biases, and you mentioned, entering into a meeting or entering into a professional space and making those very quick judgments, those initial visual judgments that we all, utilize, and it's a evolutionary device that we've developed. But when it comes to checking those innate biases, especially when we think about hiring practices or managerial relationships, how and I know you mentioned like that exercise with the images, but what are some like practical or everyday methods in which you think that we can check those biases, especially?
Sure. And as a clarifying question, would you rather me answer about recruiting and hiring and talent management, or with our personal biases?
I mean, I think we could start with recruiting and hiring. I mean, I think
Okay.
that both of those are essential, because the way in which um the biases that we have when we leave work, or the biases that an HR manager has when they leave work, aren't,
Yes,
they still enter the workplace with them. The same
yes,
reaction that they may have to someone who is serving, is in a service position when they go to the store, or what have you. If they're dressed a certain way, that same person comes in to an interview and is dressed a certain, you have a certain association. So I think we maybe start with that hiring and recruiting piece, and then maybe discuss how it affects us in our personal realm as well.
absolutely. I mean, Christina, you already hit it. It's interconnected. This is exactly why it exists.
Right.
100%. You nailed it. But when I think in general, if we're thinking broadly between maybe the two distinctions, what I tend to keep in mind is, you know how little kids are just, whenever you say something, they're like, why? And they go on, and it's just really fun for them. And they're just really trying to pick apart why something is, because they don't have the lived experience to be able to say, well, this is how it's always been, right? For them, they're like, this is new. I don't know why this exists. So
Mhm.
can you imagine if we tapped into that inner child when going through these processes? So especially with, let's say, recruiting or something that's institutional, if we're constantly asking why, we're going to get to the root of if there are some implicit biases or maybe some inequitable practices built into an infrastructure that has always been there, or we've always done it this way. I mean, I can't think of how many times when I've done interviews and hiring before, almost every time I would give an interview, I'm looking at the questions like, how old are these questions? Y'all been using these for 10 years? Like, how is that even still relevant? And how is it, did anyone tell you that this doesn't work, or you just made it, felt fine about it, and left it? So when it comes to recruiting or hiring, one thing that I've been talking to recruiters a lot about, especially because they're going out, they're looking for folks, they're looking at resumes, they're trying to connect them with companies per se. And are we taking the time to truly get to know someone beyond their resume? Because at the end of the day, the best worker is going to be the one that's going to show up, be the most reliable, and in their own way. And we have to provide space for them to be their best person. But in order to do that, we have to see beyond what they are putting on the resume that they can bring to the table. I mean, if you look at my resume, it looks like I've just been really focused in sports for a really long time, which is true, but it doesn't highlight all of this DEI ideas, advocacy, stuff that is truly in my passion. You won't know that until you have a conversation with me. So that being said, if someone's looking at my resume and doing that quick scan, they're going to disregard that. What they also might think about is say, I don't have my master's degree. And that has never been because of an academic achievement. I went to a very good school. UVA was my last choice. The reason I couldn't go to my dream school, which is Duke and Johns Hopkins and Stanford, and I got into all of them, was because my parents at the last minute said, we can't pay for this for you anymore. And I had no money, right? Because I had been working, and I'd been playing sports, and I had been doing all the volunteers and stuff you have to do to get in those institutions. So and the concept of debt is terrifying to me, because that's a whole American socioeconomic thing, but let's not get into that. But that's terrifying for me, yeah? So I go through college, and the choice to go into a grad school program, it was not a choice for me. I needed to make my own money. I needed to survive because I didn't have any other support system at that time. And support system in the way, like, I needed to adult, I needed to feel established, I needed to feel like I could take care of my own, I don't need to move back home, all those things. So what that looks like on my resume is I don't have a master's degree. So how many recruiters are looking at that saying, you don't have a master's degree, this person does have a master's degree, and they're going to think that person is a better worker, but they're going to miss out on maybe someone that worked really, really hard because they had life circumstances that made it so the 3 words on a paper aren't going to look the same as somebody else's. And one of the first things we can do as recruiters, as hires, is dig into that. And also give grace for when people are showing up in the job interview process, because that's stressful. It is stressful. It is hard.
Yes.
So many of us, literally, like a large majority of folks, suffer from anxiety in the world. so many people suffer from anxiety or have a mental health disorder that has an anxiety-based component. And we're all human, so we all feel anxiety as well. So if you are judging someone on how composed they are during the interview, are we taking into account the spectrum on which someone might be when it comes to accessibility and anxiety and how debilitating that can be? Are we just are we giving grace in that moment to say, this person might have anxiety out the wazoo, but it's completely fine because this is just a momentary experience of them. And maybe what can I do to help them feel more comfortable in this space so they feel better to show their best selves and feel better about the interview in general, and they're not going back and kicking themselves after the interview. And when they get to this phase, are we not just asking folks to assimilate into a workplace, but are we, the culture changes every single time a person steps into an organization. It should never, ever, ever be the same. That doesn't make any sense. It's like cooking something and adding a different ingredient. It doesn't just hide with all the, you've changed the flavor. It's a different soup at this point. That's very long-winded to say that we definitely bring in our personal biases to these. And in psychology, our mental set is the way that we process things based off of our own experience of the world. So when there are things we haven't experienced, have one negative experience, have very limited experience about, we're not going to have a full ability to really judge that scenario in an accurate way. So if you have very negative experiences with, let's say, people that identify as cis men, and you come into an interview process or a workplace and you feel like you are seeing some of the same negative behaviors that you've experienced before, that's going to come in. That's going to be a big factor, and that matters across identity, doesn't matter what. And we have to check ourselves all the time. And the last thing I'll say on that is that I got told a while ago that our first thought is really just a gut reaction, and the second thought is what we actually think, because we're going to have those gut reactions. We're trained to do that. But am I thinking about it again and be like, wait, do I really feel that way? Am I really hating on this person's outfit right now? Like, I don't need to do that. I'm internalizing this. I'm having a bad day. Like, that's probably the actual thought.
Right. I love that kind of introspective reflection back on your own, where you're sitting, where you're coming into this space from. And one of the things that I wanted to note, as we, because I know that a lot of your work has been advocating for mental health advocacy in the workplace. And I think we oftentimes think about that, like for current employees, for folks that have been with the organization for a while, but you mentioned like two pieces of that, like people that are, in the interview process. Like, I don't think that in conversations that I've had regarding mental health in the workplace, it's always framed with current employees. We never think about how do we support people that may be entering our organization, even new employees, that space of like, you're entering into this space, there's certain things in this environment that may be triggering for whatever reason, be it the physical space itself, the people that you may be working with, and how do we be knowledgeable of that and try to address it and be proactive about it in the first place. So I would love to know, how do you think, from a mental health advocacy standpoint, can we better advocate for people in the interview process, people that are just entering into the organization before they reach even their ability to be able to take mental health days from like a PTO standpoint? How do we offer those mental health resources in that regard?
Sure, absolutely. My first reaction to this is always just ask. We're always asking. Asking is one of the most respectful things I think that we can do when it comes to disability justice and within DEI ideas work in general. We're trying to understand, what's the best way I can respect you by? What are your pronouns? Or what do I identify as? Or how do you feel about this particular thing? How can I make something more accessible for you? Is a question that we can ask from the very jump. Is there any reason why a recruiter who looks at a resume can't ask that question from the very beginning to set them up for success with that organization? And or the employer telling recruiters to take more accessible practices, or asking recruiters, how can we receive this person well when they come in? Is there things that maybe we should know or take into consideration on how they just might actually present, or if, because I imagine there is a beautiful amount of space that could be held for folks, especially when it comes to accessibility and mental health, on if there's less stigma on, let's say I have an anxiety attack or panic attack that morning of an interview. Am I going to get thrown into the no pile because I need to reschedule with this employer because I'm having a mental health crisis at that time? Or are they automatically going to chalk it up to they think that I'm a liar and they think that I'm just trying to cop out? So that's kind of the start, and coming in with education on what different sort of, let's say, mental illnesses or even anxieties or even just barriers for entry in general can look like within the interview process. So am I just assuming that someone has an equitable access to technology and good Wi-Fi and all of that? Am I just assuming that this person could find a quiet place? What if they're a single parent? What if they just happen to have like 10 dogs? What if, these things that, again, don't take away from this person's ability to do their job and doesn't necessarily take away from their professionalism. And especially for new employees coming in on intake forms, things like that, can we ask a question in a safe way that is, do you have a disability? If you would like to disclose, it's completely optional. If so, what accommodations can we take for you? And I imagine if a new manager has answers like that for an employee that they're coming in, what sort of grounding, powerful relationship can come from that? And or in the onboarding process, saying that it is the organizational standard that you can, if you feel comfortable, communicate whatever needs you might have across the board, mental health and beyond, to your manager. And our first priority is to, one, trust you, to believe that, if some emergency needs to come up, we can cover it, setting up our system, our work system, so that if someone has to tap out, we're okay to tap in and leaning in, because someone taking care of their mental health or the benefits that work for them should not be a decision on how is my work going to affect other people if the organization works for them. Yeah. And this experience I can definitely say firsthand, because at Inclusion Next work, and my manager is here, Dan, actually. So one of the first things that we have started off with in our work relationship is, hey, this is my diagnosis. I have bipolar 2, and I'm like, this is what it looks like during certain weeks. Sometimes I'm going to be here and it's going to look a lot different, and other times it's going to be over here. Or maybe I need to drop out or something like that. And also, here's my flexible work schedule is intended because I like to stack things up during the beginning of the week and have things lighter towards the end of the week. Because when it comes to my mental health process, it's always Mondays and Tuesdays that I'm more ramped up, and it's easier for me to feel bogged down towards the rest of the week. Right. And hey, can you imagine having this conversation with a manager at some big organization? They might think that there's something complicated here, or something sneaky going on. But the question back is, why did you never trust that person in the first place? I don't understand. Why hire the person if you didn't trust them? Why? Yeah. Well, did they do anything wrong? If someone, of course, abuses power or abuses a privilege, and I get it. But until then, I'm going to know that what's best for that person and their mental health is what they tell me.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I have to let them tell me. I have to let them tell me what they want and what they need, because I can work around that. As organizations, we can work around it. We just have to decide that we're going to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting when you were thinking about you don't know whether a person, especially when we're entering into a virtual environment, a lot of us work, completely virtually, completely remotely. And I think about the increased anxiety that folks feel about, one, people entering their homes. I know that people, you always hear constantly people apologizing. I'm sorry, I'm eating. I'm sorry for my kids. I'm sorry for my dogs. I'm sorry for the train. I'm sorry for the ambulance. I think I was about to apologize when we first got on. I heard the ambulance and I was like, oh no. But all these things that especially when you're thinking about an interview process or a conversation with your manager or what have you, can be slightly anxiety inducing, that are oftentimes out of our control, but also people do make judgments about, you think about, okay, this person lives near a hospital. Where do they live? Why does this person's background look like this? Why does the person even like have a background on, as opposed to showing that all these like little small judgments that we make. And I think that goes back to your reflection of just that kind of second thought, like that initial question that we ask ourselves, or that initial thought that comes up, and then reflecting it back to ourselves, like, why am I making this judgment? But I also wanted to talk, because this is everything that you are talking about ties in so beautifully, and I guess that's the beauty of intersectionality, right? But when we're thinking about one of your areas of expertise, aesthetic trauma, and the discrimination that people face based on their appearance, and the impact that can have on how we enter into the workplace from a mental health standpoint. And I know that a lot of that aesthetic-based trauma and hair discrimination, what have you, is tied into your work with psychotherapy. And I think about how historically people of color communities, thinking specifically for myself as a Black woman, or like hearing stories from the Black men in my family, is like the barbershop is kind of this like form of group therapy. You're gathering around with people talking about things, and your hairdresser or your cosmetologist of sorts can become, they're counselors, or you tell them what's going on. They maybe offer advice. You feel like this immense amount of psychological safety with them, especially if you built a relationship with them over the years. So I would love to hear more about how you have tied in that already kind of historical relationship that people of color tend to have with cosmetologists, while also looping in destigmatizing and gaining access for people of color to mental health. How was that bridge able to be created with psychotherapy?
Yeah, great question. And thanks for bringing that up. I want to allude back to your anecdote about the barbershop. And that's a very relatable situation. It's a very common situation that is cross-cultural as well, right? It's not just Black men in barbershops have the sense of community. It's all barbershops. I've been in barbershops in Jersey, and they have the same community. Right, and something about a place that you go regularly to, and you go in feeling, let's say, less than your best, and then you come out feeling very good about how you look. Our relationship to our aesthetics is universal and very strong. And we use standards by which to measure our own beauty or aesthetic value from, as we know, media and what we've been told and all that. And we've internalized a lot of those standards as well. So when we're able to challenge what internalization comes from those standards and get affirmation from a community around us, that feels really, really good. So for example, I don't go to the salon to get my locks retwisted. I do them now. But when I did,
okay.
right, I make my own products,
Okay.
And so but when I used to go, obviously you go in there, you get the twist, it feels great, it looks great, especially in the lock journey. And at one of my old jobs, I actually went in with a fresh retwist, which, if anyone knows, that is an amazing feeling. Your scalp is like, yes, thank you for the sunshine. And my coworkers did not notice, and I was confused because I'm like, how come you're noting every Jersey boy's haircut here, but I get my locks retwisted and you can't notice that? But two, also later on, a manager, or sorry, our CEO had made a joke about my hair looking like a mop. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're talking about in this anecdote how I felt drastically changed based off of someone else's standards of beauty, ignorance on language and appropriate, like what you should say about it. But they are operating from a perspective that isn't uncommon. So now I'm operating in this self-consciousness as the only Black person in my office, thinking, oh, they're probably all thinking this. This is probably all happening. And I say that to say that what feels really good in a barbershop salon setting, what feels really good in our own communities, tends to work better for us in our mental health, because it's less like having to explain why having locks or braids and all these things are still professional. And when we talk about barriers to entry for mental health care, there is a lot of hesitancy and stigmatization around mental health care in general, especially within communities of color. And there are lots of factors internally and externally why folks don't go seek out the help that they need. And one of them is affordability. So a lot of therapists and psychologists, they do not take insurance, because when they take insurance, they're not making a lot of money per session. And so they opt for private practices with per hour, payment that you're paying every session. And that can price a lot of people out. Physical distance if they're going in person. Therapist availability. So about 3% of all psychologists are Black, period. That's it.
Period.
and that doesn't break it down by gender. It doesn't break it down by age. It's 3%, period. And we're also counting in, we're saying specifically within the Black community, and something that can often happen, are stigmatization around seeking out mental health care in general. Like, why aren't you keeping it in the family? Why aren't you keeping these things to yourself? Or just pray it away? Or, these things that we hear. Why do you need to go to some stuffy little office with some like older white man to talk about your problems? He's not going to get you. Like, these are all very real reasons that get internalized. And like, can you imagine a young kid or a teenager that thinks that they need help and they can't go get it because they don't have the money, they don't have the access, and when they try to bring it up, their parents deny their mental illness and or say that it just dismiss them altogether. But what we do is train stylists, barbers, and other community members to be mental health lay people and give mental health first aid. We also give them curated lists of POC mental health practitioners local to their area. So they have someone come in, they hear all the secrets, they hear all the stories, they make all the bonds, they know the kids, they know the parents, they know the grandma. And they're able to have a perspective into their lives that's very unique. And that if they see that there could potentially be a problem, they have this ready resource right here. Like, hey, you can go to this person right here. There are the specialties. This is how much they cost. These are the insurances that they take. And we can get you set up in care in a way that our community of care supports you along the whole way. Because that's what we have to do. It is so easy for folks that need mental health care to drop off at any point in that journey. I mean, I've been on and off in therapy. I totally get it. It's what happens. And that doesn't even guarantee that when they get in the door to that therapist's office that they're going to stay, because that's a whole relationship that needs to be built. And then getting into therapist shopping and how frustrating that can be for folks, or how defeating that can be, because you're like, no one understands me. And that's assuming you have the money to go and check out all those therapists. So what we do is back it up a little bit and enable those community members, stylists, barbers to be able to give a bit of that mental health first aid, that mental health care in a way that's psychologically safe, that's caring. They have a touch barrier they can break, so they can actually, like, you've had a stylist or barber, like, maybe like massage your head or put the hand on your shoulders. Like, this is something comforting that is vastly different, and that is much more culturally relevant and supportive in a way that doesn't stigmatize, their entry into mental health care.
Absolutely. And I think when you were talking about all these other elements of the stigma, I think, this association with weakness for seeking out help, I think that that's something that we oftentimes associate with masculinity. But I think, especially women of color, this idea of strength is something that is often, it creeps its way into that stigma, or like the stigma in regard to seeking out psychological professional help or what have you. But I would love to dive more into this idea of mental health first aid. So what does that look like? I'm just curious. Well, how does psychotherapy kind of define that?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. So in the certification, we do an intensive. So it's a 2-day intensive or a self-paced course online. So basically we start off with the history of mental health as it relates to hair, as it relates to aesthetics, all the way back to ancient Kemet in Egypt, and all that, going through different African tribes, and how the importance of hair rituals as it connected to spirituality and mental health and accommodating their needs for their society and becoming a warrior. Like it's all these different things that are connected. And then we jump into the portions about identifying mental illnesses and what that looks like. So we go through many of the signs, symptoms, names of disorders. But as we go through each one, we also go through and challenge the bias in the DSM, because the DSM is inherently based off of a subject that many of us do not represent. So we will label it and say here are the common symptoms, but from a cultural lens, this is how it might show up differently. So you mentioned about the stereotype of a strong Black woman, which again, I will fight against that tooth and nail. It is a learned response. It is overly valued, not saying that we cannot be strong as Black women, but I also want to hold space for people that do not identify as strong. I think that we internalize a lot of things when we hold our strength. For anyone, holding strength at the forefront means that we are pushing down our own weaknesses and then unable to ask for the help that we need. But anyway, the point being, going through, for example, as a strong Black woman, one woman in our course said that when she has panic attacks, some people might not even know because she doesn't show it. And when she's sharing that, it's like, can you imagine someone having a panic attack and you just not even having any idea? If you've ever had a panic attack, you know how terrible that feels. It's debilitating. I've been on the floor, like out of my mind in a panic attack. And for someone to feel like it is more important to not show any of those symptoms than to reach out for help for whatever decision that is, it's hurtful to hear. It's hurtful to hear about, because I'm like, I wish I could have just held you in that space and shown you that it's okay to open this up. So we talk about how certain symptoms, certain signs of certain illnesses might not show up. You might only see top of the, iceberg for certain things, or for example, how schizophrenia is disproportionately, like Black men are disproportionately diagnosed with schizophrenia. And a lot of that has to do with the definition of delusions and what that looks like in a cultural context. There are actual symptoms of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders that are, let's say, religious delusions. So it's like, if you feel like you can talk to a deity or ancestors or whatever, then you might be having this religious delusion. And if you ask anyone,
did that this morning,
right? You're like, no, my ancestors told me to do this today. What are you talking about? Like I talked to my spiritual source this morning, right? It's like, but that exists. That is literally on paper. So we break down each of those and also talk about things like the big pharma directly correlates to what can be diagnosed, and then what medicine can be associated with the diagnosis to then have doctors pushing it out and things like that. So we want to take with a grain of salt things that can be labeled as a diagnosis, because these other medications or other things that people might be uncomfortable with is the whole chain. So we help them identify signs, symptoms. We talk about ways to respond in a colloquial setting. Like we go through active listening. We go through, and that components like paraphrasing, mirroring. We go through body language. We go through what to do if someone reports or trigger warning suicide, like suicidal thoughts, or if they have a plan, if they have ideations. We talk about navigating your own support. Like, don't offer support if you can't give it, because that letdown, for example, someone with depression, that's going to make it worse. And it's okay to say, I might not have the bandwidth to do all of this right now, but here's what I can do. Would any of this work for you? Or is there something I can do within that purview? Or even, I don't have the bandwidth to necessarily have this conversation or give you the verbal support I want to give you right now. But if I can just have a bit of time, then maybe we can chat about this a little later on. That's much better than being checked out in a conversation or not offering the right verbal cues or support when someone's trying to share something deep with you. So we go through examples. We practice active listening on the spotlight like this, and cover all those bases.
Well, I just have to say that I am mesmerized by the work that you all did. This little bit that I've been able to hear from you and from reading in preparation for this conversation it seems like it just is something that I, is just so tailored and so it captures such a scale of what is, I think, is just so essential for people in communities where therapy has been stigmatized. It creates such a natural entry point, and I'm so excited just hearing what you're talking about. It just makes me so happy. But I do want to open up the chat for people who have questions. I know Andrea Dunn in the chat really resonated with your statement about the strong Black woman, and also referenced being the only Black woman and only Black person in the office, and having to seek out therapy trauma. But I would love, Andrea, if you want to come off mute and share more about your experience and converse with Desi. I really appreciate you sharing, but if not, we can keep it in the chat.
Hi. I get emotional because I really thought something was wrong with me. And I was trying to fit the system. I'm almost 60, and I have been trying to fit this system of their sense of perfection and put it on me, and I erased myself. So trauma therapy has helped me find myself, my true self, the person I was years ago when I started out in corporate America, and I totally lost her and I felt horrible. And now I tell my story because if any woman or man is out there and they're feeling like that and they need to seek help, it's not you. It's a system that was designed around you that you're never going to fit. So don't spend your life trying to fit it. Just free yourself and be the best you, because we need you.
Andrew, you are definitely hitting on some of the most important points, and I appreciate you sharing your story immensely and you having the bravery to share that story as well, because we can hear the hurt and the pain in your voice, and I want to acknowledge that and normalize that as well. There's nothing to apologize for getting emotional or to call out, because you're experiencing and have experienced trauma. This is what is actively happening, and beyond just, when you're in that particular workspace, you bring it home. We bring it home. We bring it home and look in the mirror and see something not great from what we were told isn't great, or we're like convinced to feel isn't great. And I also think that your story is a really good testimony to the long-standing effects of systemic oppression, especially within the workplace, and how in general capitalism within corporations and organizations is not meant to be emotionally caring. It's not meant to pour into you or give back in a way. It is meant to take from you and then ask for more, and then compare you to the next person and say that you need to give more to get to that person. Oh, and to get paid as much as them or get paid more than them, and we need more and more and more. So inevitably your cup is going to be empty, and inevitably, and then fighting against, well, I just need to be strong. I need to be strong for myself. I need to be strong for the people I'm responsible for. I need to be responsible for my partner. I need to be strong. And especially within our community, and there's a lot of racial, gender complexities that factor into this as well. But that strength is something that is both helpful and a crutch for us.
Right.
It is, it is something that we lean into because we feel like it's something we're supposed to do, and it's almost like a goal that we want to achieve. And when we get there, we feel like I got through that in a strong way and didn't cry through that meeting. So that's a really good thing for me. Yeah. And that measure of competency and that success, which I'll say to you, Andrea, because this is something that I've actually been talking to my therapist a lot in the last couple of weeks. Because one of my biggest things that I'm navigating on is my competency, is my insecurity about competency and my impact on the world and imposter syndrome and things like that, and feeling good enough. And when I have feelings like that aren't great, like you're saying, that aren't strong, that aren't great, am I able to let that flow and let that be? Because I can't ever make it not a part of me. I can't separate myself from it at all. It is part of me. And how can I can I do better expecting folks to make space for me in my most authentic, raw, real, weak, vulnerable, need help self if I can't do it first?
Right, exactly.
You know?
Thank you. Yeah. And I really resonated when you said it's only 3% like therapy specialists, Black, because when I reached out to the Black therapy community first, and nobody responded. None of them, no response whatsoever. So my therapist is a much older white lady, but this is what she specializes in. I didn't even know they had therapy for racial oppression. And I was like, wow. And it's coming from a white woman, but that's who responded, and she's been awesome. That's who I needed.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you pointed out that example too, because what matters at the end of the day is you getting the help that you need, you being understood, you having a good relationship with your therapist, and using that as testimony. A lot of therapists can write down that they're good at cultural competency, and that's variable across the board. That's probably a course that was taken in college. May or may not be totally accurate, but sometimes you find it, and that's completely fine. And we don't always get what we need, because of those 3%, that's not even counting those that are completely booked and busy, because that is very real. Many folks, especially Black practitioners, get fully booked because of the need and because of the disparities between who needs it and how many people are available. I saw a note in the chat about sharing a list of Black therapies and mental health practitioners. Yeah, Sandy, so a couple of things. Obella, I hope I'm saying that correctly, dropped a really good link there, therapy for Black girls. For everyone that goes through the course, like, I make the list for them. So if you want one in a particular city, I'm happy to help you out. I can just make you a list of who's there. But Psychology Today is also a very good one, because you can filter for their specialty being, if you're looking for a particular ethnicity, you can filter for that. And you can also filter by the gender that they've listed, and it can really help narrow down folks in your community who might take what insurance and stuff like that. But it does take a little bit of searching. I think ZenCare is also another good one, ZenCare.
Yeah, I want to thank Andrea again for your vulnerability and bravery and sharing in this space. This is a community space, but I know that it's still not taken lightly to be brave and share your story in this space. So thank you so much. And yes, I think people are dropping the links that Desi mentioned in the chat. So please feel free to leverage them. We encourage you to do so. And if anyone else either wants to put their question in the chat or come off mute and ask a question or offer any insights as a part of this conversation, please feel free to do so. And I'll just skim the room. If you want to raise your hand, okay, we have 2 hand raises. Okay, so we'll start with Obella. Go ahead.
Hi, Desi. My name is Obella. I am a DEI strategist with Nika White Consulting. I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you for being here and being who you are, because this conversation has been amazing and I love it. And my background is in mental health, so like us dropping therapy resources in the chat has my heart just like singing. And so sort of to that point, if you don't mind being so forthright as to share, like, how in your own relationship with therapy have you gone about creating ways to like really fortify yourself against those environments? I know we talked a little bit about how, you know, sometimes you're in there to survive and you still have to survive. So what are the ways that you have gone about creating strategies to protect yourself, perhaps in your therapeutic relationship or just in your experience as a whole?
Yes. You're asking the right question. And thank you for asking that question. I'm so excited. So what we're asking basically is like, how has therapy helped me get through this whole situation? And to be honest, I I'll start by saying I'm a very, very big advocate for challenging your therapist. I have been through therapy for a long time. I've been through a few therapists. And with this newest one, for example, I rolled up in the first couple sessions, like, listen, this is what I don't need. I have done this. I do some counseling. I've done, like, I know all the steps. I don't need talk therapy. I don't need classic CBT. I need something deeper and more challenging, or else I'm not going to take you seriously as a mental health professional to help me. And that sounds really annoying, but what it did is create a framework so I could get more out of my process from my therapist. Because it's really easy, again, if you've never been in therapy before, you go in, and if you're not setting those expectations, your therapist is just kind of guessing at first, like what you might need. It's totally okay to go in and be like, I don't need you to coddle me. Please just tell me about myself for the next 45 minutes. That's over here. So that being said, my therapist in particular, when I've brought up particular challenges, and a lot of my insecurities and work in therapy have focused around, again, feelings of incompetency, feelings of like imposter syndrome, self-worth, not feeling like the best about myself, and also just like need for competition, like to be better than others. And I'm also very, very self-critical. And so when we're, and control is a big part of that as well. So when we're talking about unpacking some of that, some of my challenge lately has been, instead of trying to hold on to something that is almost like an impossible task, or instead of trying to control my emotions at work so much, if trying to control how other people see me or perceive me, because I don't want them to see me as anything less than what I want to show them, or trying to control if people think I'm weak or not. And the fact of the matter is, I generally tend not to give as much permission to myself that I would like to see from others. I also can't expect people to understand and interact with me in a way that I haven't communicated with them in the first place. And this is like communication one, or like in your relationships, right? If you don't tell someone what your love language is, then they're not going to know that you don't care about gifts and that you need words of affirmation, which is exactly my situation. If you give me a gift, I'm not gonna care about it. But if you write me a love letter, I'm absolutely gonna melt in your arms. And that mindset, I think, can be taken into the workplace or into other situations that cause stress. And let me give you the framing and expectations for myself. And if you don't step up into that, or you're not taking that seriously, that almost gives me more permission in my mind to write you off, like to free myself from the disappointment of you not getting me, you not giving me what I need, you not being replenishing into my space and my energy and my spirit. If I gave you the option and you just kind of walked away from it. And that being said, it sounds kind of cliche, but of course we can't control the actions or decisions or anything with other people, but also it's not always my hill to die on. I have a lot of fight in me. I will fight people up and down, especially with social justice. Sometimes though, I can't. Sometimes can I tell myself that I can't, so I'm not losing what's left in my cup for someone else that won't get it in the first place. Tomorrow I might feel ready to die on that hill, but today I'm not. And using that language to set people's expectations, especially if they expect you to react in a certain way, or especially if you just don't have the energy to get into it right now, it's like, I'm gonna have some feedback on this. Can I check in with you a little bit later? It's like let's just defer it until I get my sharp tone pulled back, or these sorts of things. And then the last bit I'll mention about these feelings of competencies, like insecurities, anxieties that we all deal with and that we can all bring into the workplace. Deciding for yourself if your support system can extend to your colleagues, coworkers, or not, whatever's comfortable for you. I use the example of my manager before. Dan is on here, and these are things I've communicated to him. And so he also knows my love language, which is words of affirmation. And so when he recognizes that I'm starting to really get into this head of like, I can't do this, this is not good, I'm not good at this, whatever, he pours into me through my love language. So I receive that. I receive that so well, and it pours back because we have similar sentiments. I'll be like, Dan, you are amazing. You're a boss at what you do. I'm learning so much from you. And sometimes, especially as high performers, and everyone's a high performer, but especially when your mind is constantly going and you feel like you have to keep outdoing yourself, you need that reminder sometimes. And it can be coworkers, it can be managers, it can just be friends, but getting that somewhere to set up that community of care in place, for me, has been immensely helpful before my insecurities or thoughts that I still need to manage run rampant on relationships that I'd rather not burn to the ground, and or give me the strength to move away or turn away from things that are sapping my energy until I'm ready for it. It doesn't make me less of a social justice advocate if I walk away from a fight every now and then. It doesn't make me a bad person to choose someone out when they need to be and then say nice things about others. You know, if someone's really attacking me, you know, it doesn't, like, multiple truths can exist at once. And so giving permission for ourselves to have those exist at the same time is probably extremely hard, but can be reiterated by a community of care. Say, hey, I need you to step up. Remind me of this. Remind me of this. Okay, cool. Thanks, squad. Let's go.
Yeah. You use one of my favorite expressions, which is like, what hill am I gonna, I learned that from one of my mentors in college, is middle-aged Black woman. She just said, you know, what hill am I gonna die on today? And you know, you have to pick your battles, and sometimes you might die on that hill 2 months from now, but you have to make that executive decision for yourself. Like, I'm gonna stay at the bottom. I'm gonna stay in the valley today. So, Desi, thank you so much. I realized that we're right at time, and I trust that there were probably some other folks that wanted to engage with you today. But if you're willing, we would love to maybe allow people for a space to connect with you post today. So your email or whatever method would be best for you, LinkedIn, what have you. I just want to thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone from all across the country and in the world for who joined in our conversation today. It was so great to meet you, Desi.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all for having me. Yeah, we could share my LinkedIn, email, whatever works. Appreciate y'all.